In part of today's Farm Report, the monarch butterfly has seen a steady decline in the past few years, but the U.S. Forest Service is trying to help do habitat preservation and reconstruction. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has more.
You perhaps have heard of the declining populations of pollinator species and efforts to protect them through establishment of pollinator-friendly habitats, plants that offer the needed pollen and nectar for those species. Now, most of the focus has been on honeybees, but as Robert Harper of the U.S. Forest Service notes, there is also a concerted effort to protect the habitat of another iconic pollinator species, the monarch butterfly.
They have declined by more than 90%. I think the figures are about 97% in the last decade.
And that has led to partners ranging from USDA's Forest Service and Natural Resources Conservation Service to the Interior Department's Fish and Wildlife Service to conservation groups and interested citizens. Now, Harper says because monarch migration takes place along the central U.S.,
places that the Forest Service doesn't have big ownerships.
The Forest Service plays a different role in conservation efforts.
And so while we do have specific projects both in the Lake Superior watershed and we've got one project in California, we really have an interface here through not only the habitat restoration, but through our nurseries and work there for seed distribution and production.
The research includes developing geographic-specific milkweed and wildflower seeds that can be planted and grown to build up monarch habitat in regions. As Kim Winter of the Forest Service notes, there is also the role of communication, providing information to communities on how they can help with monarch habitat restoration and preservation. For example,
the milkweed is really critical for monarch caterpillars, so the monarchs will lay their eggs on the milkweed plants. So we want to make sure that they have the appropriate milkweed plant in the appropriate region of the U.S. So when you order them, try to get a hold of someone like our partners over at Monarch Watch and ask them which ones are the ones that I need for where I live. Another really useful guide would be getting those native wildflower lists out of a publication that we have, the Forest Service and our partners over at the Pollinator Partnership, and it's called Selecting Plants for Pollinators.
And the Forest Service offers support and coordination in monarch conservation efforts through financial and technical assistance with its many partners, public and private. A recent example was its support of grants recently distributed by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to support monarch habitat recovery. Robert Harper adds that the $3.3 million in grants to 22 projects not only are meant to create a more sustainable monarch population.
When we look at the monarch butterfly, we think the declines that come with the monarch butterfly are declines that have come with so many pollinators, so many of the bee species. So while we're focusing on the monarch, it's this iconic pollinator. Our efforts are really to restore habitat for all pollinators, monarchs included.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
U.S. pasture and range condition was record good this summer, 52% rated in good to excellent condition.
That has changed over the past couple of months with the emerging drought across the South, continuing drought in the western U.S., and a drying trend in much of the Midwest.
Agriculture Department meteorologist Brad Rippey says as we started this week, we were down to only 39% in good to excellent shape and up to 27% rated poor to very poor. But of course, we've been right in the middle of some widespread and ample rains for over a week now. Pasture condition is fairly slow to respond to rain.
But we have seen some slight improvements already reported in the hardest hit states of Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. All four of those states, though, still reporting more than 40% of their pasture and rangeland in very poor to poor shape.
And the worst pasture conditions, the Pacific Coast states with over 60% in poor to very poor shape. But rains are forecast for the Pacific Northwest this week. That could help things. Nothing, though, for Southern California or the desert Southwest. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
If you want your backyard poultry flocks healthy and laying eggs this winter, an extension expert says you need to winterize the coop because, unlike their famous cousin, most chickens aren't fond of the cold. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has more.
That foghorn leghorn is one rare bird.
The snow's so deep, the farmers have to jack up the cows so they can milk them. But I like winter.
You see, unlike foghorn, real leghorns can't stand the cold. That's because they originate from Mediterranean climates, much warmer than many parts of the U.S. These types of chickens, compared to American breeds, are more susceptible to impacts from winter weather, such as lower immune systems, respiratory issues, and frostbite. In addition,
the first thing they're going to give up is egg production. So if your birds stop laying, could be the their water was frozen several days in a row. They can't produce enough water in their own bodies to produce that egg, so they're going to give up egg production and forfeit that in favor of life.
So as Bridget McRae of Delaware State University Extension points out,
You need to really consider insulating that coop and meeting the needs of your chickens first and foremost.
in addition to adding insulation sheets, not rolls, inside the coop, McRae says flock owners also need to seal up any holes to prevent draft.
If you have a coop door that can be closed every evening and opened back up in the morning, great. Use it. Make sure that there isn't some way for the chickens to get locked outside. You might have an automatic closing door to keep the birds warm that maybe closes at night when the light levels are right. It'll shut.
Temporary draft prevention includes wrapping plastic or a tarp around parts of the coop during the winter to prevent chilling the birds. She says proper heating in the coop is important, and brood lamps can be used as a supplemental heat source.
There are things that provide infrared heat. Specifically, I'm talking about sweeter heaters, and they can be hung over the perch at night, which is where the birds are going to be in the coldest parts of the evening. They're going to be perched and asleep, and you might as well keep them nice and toasty warm.
And extra bedding inside the coop will also offer warmth.
By putting down an extra 3 or 4 inches of bedding, that's going to help you, but you're also got to keep it clean, that you need to spot clean much more often.
McRae says chickens are most productive in their egg laying and most comfortable in temperatures between 55 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So in the wintertime,
Try to amend your coop accordingly.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The data that farmers can get from their machinery, high-tech sensors, drones, and the collecting and sharing of it, in other words, big data,
will lead to as much change in agriculture as the green revolution or biotechnology.
Similar to the transition we saw when we moved from horses to machinery.
But a group of experts told the House Ag Committee Wednesday there are many questions about this that need answers first. Missouri farmer Blake Hurst listed just a few of them on, for example, who owns the data from my farm.
Does the landlord own the data? Does the crop rent tenant own the data? Does the cash rent landlord own the data? Does the applicator that's driving a machine through my field that I've hired, is that my data? Is his data? Is he transmitting it? I don't know. Lots of stuff still to be worked out.
And Oklahoma State University lawyer Dr. Shannon Farrell said as far as federal patent, copyright, and trademark laws that protect other information,
there's really no good fit for agricultural data. It really just doesn't have any protection under those various umbrellas.
other impediments, farmer privacy concerns, the lack of standardized data formats, and a lack of broadband service farmers need to get and send data. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.